Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kerry Craig, and I am your host. It is Prosperity Indiana's pleasure to have you participate on today's webinar, Preparing Hoosiers for the End of Indiana's Eviction Moratorium. We wish to thank today's sponsor, AARP Indiana. Before I turn over the webinar to Prosperity Indiana's Executive Director, Jessica Love, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. Please be aware that all audio is muted. If you would like to ask a question, there are two ways to do so. First, you can use the raised hand icon on your screen and I will call on you to ask your question. Or you may type your question into the question and answer box, which is also located on your screen. We all know that technology can be trying these days, especially while working from home. So if you lose your connection, you may also reconnect using the link emailed to you. Finally, you may access today's presentation and recording later this afternoon on Prosperity Indiana's COVID-19 Resources Hub at the website address noted on the slide. And now I wish to turn it over to Jessica Love, Prosperity Indiana's Executive Director, for some opening remarks. Jessica?
Thank you, Kerry. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another webinar that we're hosting, focused on the evictions cliff facing our state after the moratorium expires tomorrow. We want to acknowledge the positives that rental assistance funds set up by various cities and the state will help mitigate the impending crisis, and adding resources to a statewide legal assistance fund to prevent evictions will also go a long way. But we also need to be prepared to proactively respond and not just hope that people will find the resources that they need. And we want to be about positioning our members and partners with information to direct the people who have yet to see the impact or have not yet sought help to the right places to prevent housing instability. And so thank you for being here and thank you for being part of the solution. I'm thankful for our team and our partner speakers for pulling together this webinar for today. And we could not do this work without the support of our sponsor. Sponsoring today's event, we have AARP, a partner in our advocacy efforts and leader with our Indiana Assets and Opportunity Network, who wanted to be part of this important conversation today. So thank you to AARP for being a supporter who has really risen to this occasion and is helping lead the way in this time of uncertainty. And we'll now have Manla Moyo, Director of Community Engagement for AARP Indiana, welcome you. Good afternoon, Manla.
Good afternoon, Jessica, and good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join this extremely important conversation around what to do, what to do as we sort of prepare Hoosiers for the end of the Indiana eviction moratorium. Thank you, as always, to our friends at Prosperity Indiana for continuing to have these critical conversations and helping to find common sense solutions to Indiana's eviction crisis. As Jessica already shared, my name is Manla Moyo, and I'm with ARP Indiana. We represent approximately about 825,000 members in the Hoosier state. Our goal is to build livable communities across Indiana, urging each of those communities to make needed investment that allow our members and non-members alike to have the opportunity to age in place. And this cannot be more valuable now, as we all have had to spend extended time in our homes brought on by COVID, which has also exacerbated a number of the disparities in housing and potentially having a devastating impact on families. The pandemic has made affordability and stability an even more pressing issue, with an unprecedented number of unemployment claims and more job losses, resulting in a surge of missed mortgage payments and the topic we're about to sort of dive into today, rental prices, increasing both the threats of evictions and foreclosures as well. And so as we face the end of the eviction moratorium, we all have a role to play in finding common sense solutions solutions to what happens next to renters in all the communities that we serve beyond the COVID crisis. It will take a coordinated effort from renters, landlords, state and local officials and advocates to work beyond COVID to find relief for households that were already cost burdened by their housing expenses. Our hope is that this conversation leads us all towards action, as we all keep in mind that for many families, that there is a genuine fear that the end of the eviction moratorium could plunge them into homelessness. And to that end, ARP Indiana commends Governor Holcomb and Mayor Hogsett for extending much needed resources to both the state and Marion County's rental assistance program. We do, however, invite all levels of government to consider tangible measures to ensure all Hoosiers can afford to stay in their homes. And although we are all impacted by COVID, as we work on solutions, it will be important that we pay close attention to the communities hardest hit. This will allow us to ensure we implement policies to both address the impacts of the current crisis and make future ones less severe, particularly on people and communities that have communities of color. COVID-19 can also mark the beginning to a new era for all of us to build towards future work to avoid as many of the foreseeable problems as we can and even solve some of the perennial ones. Thank you again to Prosperity Indiana for hosting this important conversation. It is my hope that each of you are sparked to change and to move and to impact the communities and spaces that you all represent. And so thank you again to Prosperity for giving us the opportunity to be today's sponsor. I look forward to hearing from each and every one of the panelists today. And I hope that each of you take what you're learning today and apply and sort of move towards sort of helping Hoosiers as September rolls around and folks have to figure out what they do after tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you, Mandela, and thank you again to our partners at AARP Indiana for making today's webinar possible. For more than 30 years, Prosperity Indiana has mobilized members to create economic opportunities and improve social conditions, particularly for Hoosiers who are most disadvantaged. As a statewide cross-sector membership network of approximately 200 organizations and individuals, Prosperity Indiana's impact through members has strengthened communities and improved lives in rural, suburban, and urban areas in every county. It is our mission to build a better future for our communities by providing advocacy, leveraging resources, including providing training and consulting services, and engaging an empowered network of members to do this important work. If you are not a member currently, please go to prosperityindiana.org to learn more. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jeff Bennett, who is the Deputy Mayor of Community Development for the City of Indianapolis. Jeff, in his role, oversees 4 city departments focused on neighborhood services while leading the administration's work on larger issues like affordable housing, homelessness, and community economic development. Jeff has worked in local government and nonprofit community development for more than 20 years. Most recently, he was the Director of Real Estate Services Indiana for IFF, a regional nonprofit community development financial institution, and he was elected to serve 2 terms as Warren Township trustee. Jeff holds a degree in history from Indiana University. Welcome, Jeff.
Sorry about that. And I hope you enjoy the pre-pandemic headshot that's in this slide deck. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, to talk a little bit about the approach that we've taken in Marion County, but then to also kind of share some of the lessons learned so far and a little bit of a forward look for our program. So it was early in the public health crisis that I essentially put on the hat that I wore as township trustee, knowing that at some point we were going to need a massive amount of rental assistance, among other direct service needs, but rental assistance was the thing that sort of struck me soonest in the pandemic. And so it was really in April that we began planning. We had very, very little data at the time, and we had seen only what a few other cities had done across the country in terms of rental assistance, cobbling together community development block grant dollars or other sort of just direct service dollars from city budgets, and launching vastly undersized programs. One city had a $3 million rental assistance program, and they thought they could serve 1,500 households, and they got 8,000 applications in a week. That was the norm. And so as we kind of began our conceptualization of what a program might look like in Marion County, my first calls were to some of our community center partners that provide direct service, direct basic needs service day in, day out. And I just sort of started picking their brains about what they could do as a collective network of centers if they had a larger pool of funds available. That sort of evolved over about a month of thinking, and about that time, the city of Indianapolis / Marion County received its own separate allocation of coronavirus relief funds from the CARES Act, separate from the state of Indiana's allocation. And so knowing that we had a network of potential partners, knowing that we had a source of funding, ostensibly a source of funding, the funding came much earlier than the guidance for how we could use the funding, but we had a source of funds. We started thinking about what a system would look like. And over the course of about a 6-week period, from early June, when the City County Council authorized the appropriation of $15 million from that coronavirus relief fund to stand up our program, and the time we launched the program on July 13th, we built a countywide one-stop web-based rental assistance program in 6 weeks' time. That dollar amount, the mayor was very forthright when he announced it. We didn't expect $15 million to be enough, and indeed it has not been enough. We were able to add some philanthropic support from the Lilly Endowment to help us offset some limited administration and technology costs to actually give us some more money to pay more rent. And then just this past Monday, have added an additional $7.5 million to that fund. So we are at a fund now that puts us in the range of $25 million that we can use for rent in Marion County. And I can get into program specifics now if you'd like, or I can wait until we move into the sort of question and answer part of the agenda. But we know that the need continues to grow. So we received 10,000 tenant applications in 3 days. And by the real-time math calculation of those requests, we were at $15 million in assistance requests within 3 days. And so we flipped our system to a wait list that continues to grow. And we are at, I think as of this morning, about 20,000 people that have expressed an interest in assistance through that waiting list. And we expect in the next few days to be able to begin taking applications from that waiting list, I think in batches of, in groups of 5,000. So we'll begin to knock down that waiting list. But even at $25 million, a fund that is equal to the size of the city of San Antonio's fund, it looks like the need in Marion County will outstrip the resources available.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, we will wait until the question and answer period. So if you do have any questions for Jeff, please hold those until that time. Next, I'd like to introduce Brandon Beeler, who is the Director of the Housing Law Center at Indiana Legal Services Incorporated, where he represents low-income clients in rental housing matters, as well as identifies and litigates statewide systemic issues related to Hoosier tenants. Mr. Beeler began his advocacy for low-income tenants by being selected to work as part of a grant funded by Equal Justice Works and AmeriCorps as Tenant Engagement and Community Economic Development Legal Fellow, where he worked with public housing tenants in projects undergoing the rental assistance demonstration conversion. Prior to joining ILS, Mr. Beeler served as a law clerk for the Honorable Richard L. Young in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Indiana. Indiana Legal Services Incorporated is a not-for-profit law firm and the largest provider of free civil legal assistance to eligible low-income people throughout the state of Indiana. ILS helps clients who are faced with legal problems that harm their ability to have such basics as food, shelter, income, and medical care or personal safety. Most of the cases ILS handles are cases such as family law, where there is domestic violence, housing, consumer law, access to health care, and access to government benefits. Welcome, Brandon.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here today on this really, really important topic. It's, eviction's been a topic for the past few months, but now we're sort of on the brink. So I really appreciate everyone's engagement and interest in what we may expect over the next few weeks and months. So first of all, I just kind of want to start off with some initial comments that I think may hopefully help kind of set the landscape for where we are. So, I think it's probably is no surprise to anyone on the call from our position, our clients would really greatly benefit, from an extension of this moratorium. We do appreciate that we haven't had to fight super hard for it at this point, but let me just kind of say why I think that. And as I kind of reflected on this panel today, I just want to kind of point out some things that I've seen just this week. So, one thing, and we really appreciate the City of Indy's efforts in organizing a rental assistance program. That's been really key and helpful, and we've really tried to encourage our Marion County clients to go there. But, the rental assistance program for Marion County has sort of been on suspension for a few weeks. As of today, I heard there's about 21,000 people in Marion County on that waiting list. So, it's just needs some time to find some more funding, some time for it to get processed, as Jeff just so greatly talked about. Obviously, the demand for the program was huge, and and there was only a short time to put that together. So, that's one thing that just timing is important, and we'd hate to have a tenant evicted for non-payment when it may just be a few more weeks before those funds could reach them. And second is as talking about the statewide program operated by Ihcda. Again, there needs to be some more time. It's my understanding, and speaking with folks over there, they also too have had a very, very great demand for this. There's a lot of review of the process and a lot of review of the requirements to get in, and working with landlords and that sort of thing. So a lot of those checks haven't, just for lack of other words than just a process, it just takes time. So, tenants who are likely going to get assistance may not have received it yet. I talked actually with the landlord attorney this week who said, they've received checks from Ihcda, but for instance, they aren't marked as to which tenants they're for. I mean, that's fine. And I think that we can, they can use a process to figure that out. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is not to point into any kinks of programs, but just to say, timing is really important, and I just don't think for our clients we're quite there yet. Finally, this week there's been a lot of talk about the courts. As far as I try to search at least Marion County every day, and I've not seen any news specifically about what additional or protections or procedures that the eviction courts are going to put into place. The Landlord Tenant Task Force that was commissioned by the Indiana Supreme Court, we put out recommendations a few weeks ago that gave some guides and ideas and some suggestions for courts across the state to help implement a potential surge in their caseload. But I think, again, courts need some time. This only came out a few weeks ago. Changing processes and making these changes, and in order to serve everyone and give access to courts and access to justice to everyone, is just something that needs some more time. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later, but as you guys on the call probably all have at least heard about, is the task force is also coming up with a mediation program. That's not quite ready to be launched yet. I do know work is being done quick on it, but again, that's something else that should be available to all tenants if they're facing the situation. So that's just something, and I guess I could say also, speaking specifically as to the suggestions and recommendations made by the task force, there's certain things that go in there. Like, and one thing that I think is a strong and a great suggestion is, making the first hearing like an informational hearing. So if these, if tenants are getting notices and they're going to have to go to eviction court, rather than having to get everything ready and get, whether it's finding rental assistance, finding legal aid, finding an attorney or something, if that first hearing is simply an informational hearing, that's something a tenant could go through and actually maybe have the opportunity to work with their landlord. So again, my point on all these things, or these are just, 3 things I've seen this week that show that, some more time would really be beneficial to the clients that Indiana Legal Services serve. So pivoting now a little bit, and I'm certainly probably not going to speak for much longer because, I want to leave time for questions and discussion for everyone on the call as you guys all have your own specific questions and tenant and landlord issues. Pivoting to the question is what are we advising or what are we doing to prepare tenants specifically? I guess my initial caveat I should say is this is certainly an emerging situation. We don't know what we're going to see. We don't know what, and everything I say here is kind of broader because I don't want to go down a path that things we're going to try and may have to pivot and change. But here's just some broad things that our office and our organization statewide is working on. And suggestions for any tenants, whether you're a landlord or whether you're a tenant advocate, some things that we're suggesting that tenants can do to maybe put themselves in a better situation. First and foremost is just doing a simple search to see and know whether your property is covered under one of the federal moratoria, or I guess the federal moratorium. So the CARES Act moratorium, which was for covered properties, mainly all subsidized programs were part of that, that did expire on July 25th. But if it's a non-payment issue, that does not mean the landlord can file the next day. And obviously in Indiana, they can't and shouldn't file now, or at least until the end of tomorrow. But there is a federal, if the property has a federally backed mortgage, that moratorium extends until August 31st. There are a few online databases that tenants can use. They're free. One does require you to register, but again, it's a free registration. It's the National Housing Preservation Database. That can kind of tell you if there's a subsidized program at play. And then the National Low Income Housing Coalition has a database for COVID-19 for these federally backed mortgages. And if the property shows up there, then again, that is a property that's covered under, that should be covered under the August 31st eviction moratorium. So those are just a few things to know. Again, with the CARES Act one that has expired on July 25th, there's an additional due process requirement that if it's a non-payment issue, the landlord has to first give the tenant a 30-day notice prior to the filing of the eviction action. So if it's non-payment and it's a CARES Act property, they should not be able to file for eviction yet. The notice needs to go out. And if the notice has not gone out and come Monday a case has been filed, then that's something that should be an immediate defense or moving the court to dismiss that case because that is not following the correct statutory due process. I just want to always remind people of that. That sometimes gets forgotten about. That was a great extra protection that the CARES Act included, and we just want to make sure we enforce that. The second sort of thing we're working on a lot now is, and this has been a big theme, is knowing sources of rental assistance. So besides the state and city sources, there's also a lot of private community groups that are working on rental assistance funds. Obviously, most of them do not have, or all of them don't have quite the amount of money that are in these government programs that are coming through CARES Act funds. But there's a lot of groups to look at. Not only just nonprofits. Really, we've seen a lot of really great advocacy in this area in faith groups and in places of worship. They've really come together to ask their congregants to collect money for rental assistance and are offering it to the community, not just to people who worship or are involved in those particular areas, but to really everyone and really coming strong forward. Our office is currently trying to work on something for every county to get those sources out. Of course, that's a document that probably changes every day as much, and we try to keep it updated as much as we can, but that's something that we are more than willing to share with any other groups. And again, if you're welcome to email me and I'm happy to share that. Just know that may change. So we can obviously keep in touch, and I can go that out. But also tenants, reaching out to see what other sources of rental assistance may be available to them if they're struggling to pay their rent. Applying and getting documentation for the application, that's something that we're working with tenants on. That's going to be a theme you kind of hear me say towards the end, but I'll nail it home now, is document, 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 whatever it is, because if you need to show a record, if a tenant's going to have to show a record sometime in court, showing that the tenant was proactive is, going to be putting the tenant in a more advantageous position. And I guess on that same note, another thing we're trying to talk with tenants about is, for lack of better words, is to try to get ahead of the problem as possible. We think it's really helpful, and we really strongly advise tenants to try to work and communicate with their landlords, be transparent, be vulnerable, try to work out some sort of arrangement. We believe that, most landlords don't want to see a mass eviction, don't want to, kick out all their tenants and make it homeless and try to make this work. So, we're really trying to encourage that, and to the extent our attorneys need to, or our social workers need to, for clients who qualify for services in our office, we'll kind of help guide them through those conversations or engage in those conversations if necessary. The big thing with that is, again, trying to work out repayment plans before the end of the moratorium. So that would just be, again, the best ask would be hey, landlord, I'm just starting to get my feet back to, my job starting up again. Can I start paying rent here in August? And can we make some sort of deal for me to repay what I owe April through July, something like that? Get it on paper, do it in an email, do it in text message. Small claims court's very informal for what the rules of evidence are. So just something to document you have that agreement, and that's just going to put the tenant in a much more advantageous position and hopefully give the tenant some security that they will not be evicted or lose their housing once this moratorium is lifted. And finally, on this list here is just knowing what resources are out there. And I know that's a big, a great thing that Prosperity Indiana does, and all these community groups, is really try to connect tenants to the right resources, whether it's an organization or whether it's informational packets. That's just something that's really, really helpful. So obviously, knowing that our organization, we're statewide, knowing that we exist, there's lots of local legal aid organizations in different counties. Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic operates here in Marion County and also in a few other counties throughout the state. Since this is a statewide call, I'll do a quick plug of what tenant programs that ILS currently has that are going right now. And if anyone is not familiar, I'm not going to, since I don't have a PowerPoint, I don't want to just read you a bunch of numbers and contact information. But if you want them, please feel free. I'll share my email or ask anyone, organizer at this call, and they're welcome to share my email with you as well. The first one I want to talk about is for Marion County tenants. It's a Tenant Legal Assistance Project. This project runs a hotline every Thursday from 11 to 1. It's absolutely free for tenant callers. There's no income requirement. The person does not have to be below the poverty guidelines in order to receive advice from this line. What a tenant does is they will call. They don't have to have a case filed even. They simply call and they'll be hooked up with a live attorney to ask their questions and to get some legal information. The city of Indianapolis, along with their tenants' rights ordinance at the end of February, when the city county council passed that, they also gave funds for a tenant information hotline that's operated, I believe, around normal business hours, Monday through Friday. Tenants can call that and get some basic information about their rights and responsibilities. And that line actually feeds into the TLAP program, and as well as our eviction avoidance project, which has been around for a couple of years now. And throughout the state, New Albany and Clark and Floyd counties, there's a now, which I believe just launched last Friday, there's also a weekly hotline there for tenants to call free of charge. That runs from 11 to 1 on Fridays for Clark and Floyd counties, where tenants can again speak with a live attorney and get some live information. And about a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, Fort Wayne launched their Tenant Assistance Legal Clinic, which also has a number and has its own kind of sorts of intake. So those are some of the programs that we are running that we know about that, again, have a little bit of less restrictions and barriers in order to get some legal information. So please, pass those on to your community partners, or if you're a tenant on the call, feel free to call those at any time during the operation hours. I'll kind of end with talking about this mediation program I referenced earlier. And if some of you who may not be up on this on the news, is the Indiana Supreme Court commissioned the Landlord-Tenant Task Force that came up with a series of recommendations for the courts to also contemplate and start to design a mediation program for landlords and tenants. I see a lot of advantages of this program for tenants, especially if it's a pre-suit mediation. What's beneficial about that is the tenant and the landlord could have a forum to come into a settlement agreement. Now, granted, some of those could unfortunately end with, with a possession being given back to the landlord, but it'd be an agreement. Time could be contemplated. The tenant may have time to use social services and use community partners in order to find different housing and not have to experience homelessness. Also, the program is again designed to sort of be an incentive to both landlords and tenants to maybe try to avoid the court process. And again, as everyone knows on this call, just the filing of an eviction can have detrimental consequences to a tenant. The program is not fully ready yet, as I alluded to earlier. It should be ready soon. I don't really have an answer. I wish I could tell you. I don't have a specific answer on when it's going to be done. But one thing I do want to know, and the mechanics that I am familiar with the program, is that it's something that tenants can also request. It's either the tenant or the landlord can request participation in this program. So time may be of an issue. So if it's something where a tenant feels it may be an advantage, especially if a case has not been filed, then it's something to remember or something to advise the tenants to make sure they don't miss the deadline and to participate in it. As we know more, of course, I'll be happy to give more information about it, or the Supreme Court will certainly put on their website. And finally, I do also want to mention the Supreme Court's website. There are a number of resources on there. The report that gives suggestions to courts may not be as relevant to the non-legal community, but there's about 10 or so appendices on there, including sample repayment forms and things like that can be good guides and good starting points for tenants who may want to advocate for themselves and trying to come to an agreement with their landlord. So please look at the Indiana Courts website to see if there's anything, resources there that are helpful. And finally, I'll just sort of conclude with, document everything, the agreements, attempts to negotiate, or anything like that. And the same thing for these rental assistance programs. If a tenant's on a waiting list, or a tenant has applied and maybe the landlord even refused the money, just to have sort of a documentation to court. Because again, in court, with the number they're going to see, the best position you can be in, especially if a tenant has not been able to pay rent, is to show that the tenant tried to work this out, and the tenant's trying to be reasonable and trying to be proactive in making it right. That's going to go, again, it's going to be differ, of course, judge to judge, court to court, but I just think that's a really beneficial thing. And finally, like I said a few times, is again, please try to communicate with your landlord. If you need assistance with that, you don't have to be an attorney. You can be just an advocate or a friend and go and try to help it. You don't have any special qualifications to do that. So that's just something, again, I know we only have a day left at this point unless something changes, but that's another thing too, is again, try to get ahead of the problem and opening up those lines of communication before it just has to go to court. So I will leave it there. Happy to answer questions at the end, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And Brandon mentioned a number of resources. We will collect those and post those on our COVID-19 Resources Hub, as well as send it out to all of you in a follow-up email. Next, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Layton, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of LTH Homeless Services. Jennifer has worked for LTHC Homeless Services, formerly the Lafayette Transitional Housing Center, for the past 26 years. She began her tenure after graduating from Ball State University with a Bachelor's of Science degree majoring in public relations. Jennifer started there as a case manager and thought the job would be relatively simple, to help homeless families. But what began as a job has turned into a lifelong passion. For the last 19 years, Jennifer has been the executive director of LTHC. She has overseen significant growth in the ongoing effort to meet the changing needs of the homeless population in their community. During this time, the agency has grown from 1 program to 7, from serving 9 families to helping over 250 families in 2019. Such programs include Coordinated Entry Day Resource Center, night shelter, interim housing, medical respite, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and supportive services for veterans families. She is a member of the Region 4 Homeless Prevention and Intervention Network and of the Indiana Balance of State Board of Directors, serving as the chair of the Coordinated Entry Committee. LTHC Homeless Services is the coordinated point of entry and initial assessment for anyone experiencing homelessness or a housing crisis in Tippecanoe County. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I'll tell you, as I sit here and I listen to Jeff and Brandon, I appreciate your proactive approaches to try to really stop something that is really my line of work. So as Carrie mentioned, I've been with LTHC for many years now. So people that are experiencing homelessness has been a problem in the state of Indiana for the 26 years that I've been here. So over the years, we've seen many different reasons and lots of different things that are happening in order to really impact the Hoosiers that are facing some housing challenges. And many of those things stem from economic crisis, quite frankly. And so, you know, homelessness is just one of those things that we have been dealing with and band-aiding for many, many years. And now it's really my hope that with this pandemic, we've been able to see that housing crisis and housing instability can happen to anyone. And so now is really the time that we focus our efforts on housing solutions. So I hope that when we think about this pending eviction moratorium being lifted, that we really understand that homelessness prevention and homelessness and eviction are really two different things. And so we do have some great resources that are being discussed that clearly need more time. I've been on local calls here in Tippecanoe County that are talking about the different resources and kind of waiting on the state's response. We've had over 1,100 people here in our community that have applied for rental assistance. And just as of yesterday, based on 3 different hubs that have been processing documentation, it seems like they've had around 80 applications sent to them, and I think around 30 that have actually been processed. So when I tell you that I am absolutely petrified as to what's going to happen, that is really not a joke. I received an email yesterday just from one of our judges that does eviction court, and she said to me, and I quote, "There will be a tsunami of evictions." So we are all preparing here for what this looks like, and I'm very, very concerned about the timing for this rental assistance. We are already in a homeless crisis. We already do not have enough housing for people that are experiencing homelessness. Right now, we have almost 100 people sleeping in emergency shelters, and we have 5 families that are sleeping in hotels. We don't have places for people to go. The landlords, one of the programs that we already operate is called rapid rehousing, where we work very closely with landlords and tenants and getting people rehoused. And I'll tell you that one of the major challenges with that program is on the side with landlords, because quite frankly, they, and this is how they do business, they are looking for tenants that don't have evictions on their background, and they want tenants that have a steady stream of income. So we certainly understand that, but that's not usually what our folks have when they come to us, when they're experiencing homelessness. And so part of our role is to educate our landlords as to the families and individuals with whom we're working, and what we are doing to try to really promote the housing first philosophy and getting families and individuals into housing and then connecting them with the supports they need in order to stay housed, including income, including health care. There's lots that go along with that. We have several landlords, very large property management companies that will no longer work with us because we have folks that maybe miss a monthly rental payment, or they just say they're not going to accept anyone that has no income in their housing. So yesterday I was very dismayed when I heard from our local hubs that one of the setbacks from the documentation that they're trying to get pulled through is on behalf of landlords, that they're not interested in signing the forms necessary for the federal funds to come to them for rental assistance. So again, back to what the judge said here locally is that we are going to have a tsunami of evictions. My only hope really is that when people actually become evicted, because again, we're going to have a line of people that are going to start filing, I think, on Monday morning. And so then 10 days later, we'll see when they actually go to court. Most of our tenants, so maybe our new folks will actually show up for court, but many people don't even show. They know they're behind on the rent. And so we're not even able to provide any type of a time frame. So landlords are going to be over it, quite frankly. One of the hubs told us yesterday that from the beginning until they're expecting from the beginning of getting the referral to the end when the landlord would have their payment would be an additional 20 business days. I find that hard to believe that we would have any landlords that would be waiting for that check, but maybe we will. This is a business that I've been in for a long time, and so I do know that people that are experiencing homelessness need our help, and the number one thing they need is housing. And when they need housing, they also, many of the folks that are lower income, they also need a rental subsidy. We clearly do not have enough rental subsidies for our housing that we do have here in our community or across the state of Indiana. There are solutions, there are things we can do to help people end their homelessness. With the slides that are before you, we do have, this is our normal work of business, is to help people that are experiencing homelessness. And so last year, we've done assessments for over 1,200 different people. And so normally people that come to us, these are rounded numbers, but about 600 people are usually sleeping outside or in places that are not meant even for human habitation. About 350 folks are coming to us from emergency shelters. 150 folks are staying temporarily with their friends and family. And then only 50 were actually in their own rental units and 50 that were staying at other various locations. And so back to the 50 that were in their own rental housing units, you can click to the next slide, please. So we have way too many people that just become evicted from their own rental that are due to the non-payment of rent when there isn't even a national pandemic. And as I mentioned, we've had 1,100 people that have already applied. We need the homelessness prevention funding to provide these immediate relief for any person that can qualify. Next slide, please. One of the things that we know is that when people are evicted from their rental housing, not all of them, in fact, it's a very small percentage, 12% nationally, of those people that are actually evicted from housing become literally homeless. Many people already have some supports. They have friends or family that they can go and that can stay with. And so we already are in a severe housing crisis. We don't have enough low-income housing or financial resource to house all the people that in Indiana that will need to be housed. Next slide, please. So once the moratorium is lifted, our national partners are forecasting a 40% increase in homelessness. The impact most likely won't be immediate. As I said earlier, when people are evicted, they'll go stay with friends or family. And then it's after that, kind of that honeymoon wears out, when people are tired of having friends or family staying with them, that's when people will get kicked out of staying with friends or family, and that's when they will enter our homeless system. Next slide, please. There are only temporary financial assistance solutions, and those are the ones that are coming from the federal government for homeless assistance. We need permanent housing subsidies. We really need the federal government and our state government to really invest in large amounts of financial resources for affordable housing solutions for all people. There is a solution to homelessness, and that's housing. So I thank you all for having me on today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And now I'd like to introduce Andrew Bradley. Andrew is the Policy Director at Prosperity Indiana, who works to craft and advance Prosperity Indiana's policy agenda in coordination with its members. He is responsible for producing advocacy tools, building relationships with policymakers, and assisting in leading member convening activities. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And before I begin, I want to thank Jeff and Brandon and Jennifer for the work that you're doing on the ground from your different capacities to try to help in this eviction crisis that could be coming. And also thanks to Mandla for your advocacy and your support in this issue. So Carrie, if you could advance to the next slide. I'm actually speaking today on behalf of, or at least I'm presenting the information from Ihcda on the state's rental assistance program. I wanted to make sure that everyone on this call at least was aware that the state rental assistance program is still open and available, and I wanted to at least provide the basic outline of that program. However, I'm not an Ihcda employee and I can't speak for the state. But go to the next slide, please. So this is the same slide that was presented to us before this program was open. You can see that state program was launched a month ago today, on July 13th, and was announced back in June. The program started with $25 million from the Indiana's CARES Act discretionary funds from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And since then, we learned last week that an additional $15 million will be added, so a total of $40 million, with this goal of improving housing stability and preventing eviction. So tomorrow, when the eviction moratorium is lifted, it'll be 1 month and 1 day that this program has been open. Let's go to the next slide. So before we talk a little bit about eligible households, I do want to say I received 24,000 applications for this program. And as we heard from Jeff, the city has now received almost as many, 20 or 21,000 applications. And while Marion County includes Indiana's largest city, Indianapolis, and by my quick looking this up, Marion County has about 965,000 residents, or about 14% of the state's population. The number of applications it's received has been about 45% of what's been received throughout the entire state. So I think that shows that there is some of the work that Marion County has been doing in terms of partnering with community partners that Jeff mentioned has benefited in terms of they've been able to receive a large number of applications, even if to date, before this new pot of money, they haven't been able to process them all. So before I talk about this, I want to say to everybody on this call, the state has been relying on community partners to help get out the word, but hasn't had some of those formal partnerships and formal outreach. So one reason why we wanted to have this call today was to make sure that people on this call can help carry this information out so that we can make sure that those who are hardest hit have this information and can still apply. So, very briefly, you've seen what's here in front of you. These are some of the descriptions of eligible households. Some of this is determined throughout the application process. My understanding is that the state helps to verify whether there has been an income loss that you see is required there. We've heard some questions about how that is happening throughout the state, and I think that's something we could discuss in the Q&A part. Let's go ahead and move forward. One other piece that I'll mention on this last slide is saying that renters may not be receiving assistance from another program during the month in which they are where they would get the state rental assistance funds. And so, for example, if there was a city-based program using funds, they could not be receiving that. The idea, I think, is that they're trying to make the state funds stretch as far as possible. Something to be aware of. Let's go ahead and move forward. So the design of this program is that it would cover up to $500 a month for a total to not exceed $2,000 per household. And that could make a household eligible to up to 4 months of assistance, including a combination of previous month's rent, arrears, or future month's rent for rental assistance. So again, $500 per month up to $2,000. However, when you do a little bit of math, the state has the $40 million set aside divided by 24,000 applications would mean that if every household received the same amount, they'd receive $1,666. So a question that I think emerges is whether the average household is requesting less than $2,000 or whether the state has appropriated less than what the program design is. I think that's something that we would need to ask a state representative if they were here. And you can see the timeline here. I want to make sure that folks, the place to go to apply is indianahousingnow.org. And the folks on this call, who may be the renters themselves, but service providers, should know that there is a communications toolkit there in both English and Spanish, including social media examples. And, I think it's important for everyone on the call to get that information to your networks, make sure that people are applying, because unlike a mortgage assistance program that you may remember from the Great Recession, there aren't going to be, at least current plans for like billboards or radio commercials or anything like that. It's up to the folks on this call to make sure that renters get that information that they need. And let's see. Yeah, can we go ahead and move forward? All right, so here is, as Jennifer was mentioning, the details that have to do with the landlord participation. And while she mentioned that there may be some issues for that, these are some of those details. It's important for service providers to be aware of this. This information is also at indianahousingnow.org, and you can see that there is an email address here that is meant to help address some of those questions and concerns. And I also do want to mention on IHCDA's behalf that they said a reason that their staff member weren't able to attend today is because they are really busy right now processing the applications that they've received ahead of tomorrow's moratorium deadline. Let's have the next slide. And you can see here some of the providers that are involved. I think we can go ahead and keep going. All of this information will be available in the slide deck that we publish later today. Okay, so that's the end of the part that I wanted to discuss. Carrie, I'll turn it back to you for the question and answer portion.
Great, thanks so much, Andrew. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask your question, you can pose that question in the Q&A box and I will read that. Or you can raise your hand using the raised hand icon on your screen and I will open up your mic and you can ask your question in person. So we do have a few questions here to begin and I'll read those out. The first question comes from Carla James. She says, Brandon mentioned that landlords must provide at least 30 days notice for CARES Act properties before filing for evictions. What specifically would make a tenant eligible for the CARES Act protection? Brandon?
Sure, that's a great question. So the CARES Act applies to what, as the Act defines, certain covered properties. And really that's the easiest way to think about that is if there's a federally subsidized program involved. So the Section 8 program, the public housing program, the tax credit program, Section 42. If it's one of those properties and the landlord is going to file for non-payment of rent, the CARES Act requires a 30-day notice, of non-payment or intent to file for an eviction prior to filing. So it does not apply to private landlord-tenant relationships, but it applies to subsidized.
Thank you, Brandon. The next question comes from John Robb. He says, I'm hearing from hotels that along with the rent moratorium, something was included about people in hotels that if they are in the hotel 4 to 5 days versus the usual 28 days, the hotel is considered their residence and they would have to be evicted from the hotel if they refuse to leave. Anyone like to take that question?
I'm not familiar with that provision. I will just broadly say that hotels are specifically excluded from the landlord-tenant code, meaning that they don't, that a resident of a hotel does not have the protected property interest that attaches to a rental property. But what we have argued is we saw an issue with hotels and motels and residents in them at the kind of the beginning of the moratorium back in early March and April. And what the governor's stay-at-home order, one of those very, very early executive orders he issued, when he defined home as including hotels and motels. So while it wasn't good for coverage and under the landlord-tenant statutes and the protections of the Landlord-Tenant Act, we thought there's an arguable claim that while the stay-at-home order was in effect, that since it extended to hotels and motels, there'd be like a policy reason based on the executive order for them to stay place. I'm not familiar, and I don't believe that tenants have a right to an eviction hearing. I should say residents of a hotel have a right to an eviction hearing in that circumstance.
Thank you for answering that question, Brandon. The next question comes from Ivana Ushi, who asked, how can the public help get a permanent public housing subsidy implemented at the state level?
I suppose I'll field that, and this is Andrew, and say I think that I would invite the questioner to follow up with us and follow our advocacy efforts as part of the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. I think that there's a lot of work to be done to make that kind of permanent funding available at the state level. In fact, in the short term, one thing that we're really trying to do is to make sure that we're letting our congressional delegation know that we need to have funding for COVID-related housing stability included in the next Coronavirus Relief Act. And something we've really been trying to lean on our two senators to make sure to publicly stand up and say to the Senate majority that they want that to be part of that package. So I encourage anybody on the phone who's interested in that to go to Prosperity Indiana's website, to our Action Center, and there's already a pre-populated action alert that you can participate in. And then always feel free to reach out to me directly, and we can continue the conversations about what that coalition is doing as well.
Thanks, Andrew. A few of our participants have asked whether or not we will provide resources that were mentioned here today by the panel, as well as information on website addresses. Yes, all of that will be posted on our COVID-19 Resources Hub, but we will also be sending out a follow-up email after today's webinar with that information included. We do have a question, or David Plaster would like to ask his question directly, so I'm going to open up his mic for him to do so. David? David, would you like to ask your question? David Plaster?
Oh, there we go. I didn't realize that I had myself muted. I thought, excuse me. Many large landlords will most likely, sign up for the rental assistance program. But I know I work with a lot of people that their landlords may only have, one or two homes. Would those landlords need to still sign that contract with the to be eligible for the rental assistance program? And if so, how should tenants approach their landlords if they don't seem like they particularly want to sign up for the program?
So I can answer that from the city of Indianapolis's perspective. Yeah, the landlord has to opt into the program. We can't, unfortunately, force a landlord to take a payment. So we tried to make it really as painless as possible for a landlord to be able to decide to participate. Where our program in Indianapolis actually will pay up to the fair market rent for 90 days, and it can pay back rent or it can pay forward rent. And really the only things we're asking for in return from the landlord, we're asking them to not charge fees and interest for past due rent that was accrued during the COVID crisis, so essentially since April 1st. We're asking them to work out a payment agreement with their tenant if there's an amount owed that exceeds fair market rent. And we're asking the landlord to certify that they'll just be in compliance with city ordinances. That's pretty much it. And so we found in our case that most landlords, there have only been a couple of instances where a landlord has chosen not to participate. One landlord said that they didn't think it was a good use of federal dollars. Another landlord flat out said that they didn't want to guarantee that they would comply with city ordinances. Those are both concerning, but those have not been the majority of landlords. What we've found is that most of our landlords haven't responded. Well, we're at about almost a 60% landlord response rate from our 10,000 applications, which is increasing by the day. The landlords that have not yet responded, it's usually been because they're using an outdated web browser. And so we've been able to correct that over the phone in contact with the landlord. Or the landlord has been unaware that their tenant applied. And so we've been trying to close the communication loop between landlord and tenant. So it's mostly, in our case, not been cases where the landlord has not wanted to sign the agreement, and those that have chosen not to are for reasons that man, I just tend to disagree with.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry if I could just ask a quick follow-up question. Do you have any idea when the indyrent.org website will be able to accept applications today? I just filled out one of the contact us forms for one of our participants today who had been unable to access it, and I know that it said that applications were suspended for the time being. Is there any?
Yeah, we think we'll probably have a separate announcement for that, but within the next few days, we will start taking people off of the waiting list and telling them it's time to apply, and we'll do that in pretty large batches of people, so it won't be sort of onesie twosie. It'll be in the thousands that we'll take off at a time. The reason we paused when we paused was a couple reasons, actually. One, I think I mentioned earlier, we were doing math in real time and calculating the requests of the applications as they came in. And when we got to an estimate of around 15 million in requests, we thought, let's pause and make sure we don't take $30 million worth of applications for a program where we only have 15 million available. So that was reason number one. And the reason number two was by pausing and going to a wait list, we could tweak our program if we needed to. If we saw things in reviewing completed applications that meant we needed to do a course correction, then we could, because we wouldn't have 30,000 applications that we needed to process. We only had 10, and so we were able to sort of get our sea legs, as it were, and get more money into the program. And now I think we'll be able to open it back up in the coming days. We'll take those applications in the order that people appear on the waiting list, and we'll just keep taking applications and keep paying rent for as long as we have funds available.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. This question comes from Judy Johnson. Are there any rental assistance resources for people whose financial troubles began before the pandemic or whose loss of income stemmed from reasons other than the pandemic?
So there are in Marion County, and there are some throughout the state that I could speak to. So I'm glad you asked this question, because when we were going through our initial batch of applications for review, there have been some denials. And the two primary reasons for denial of a application in Marion County, probably similar to the state, are one, a person receives rental assistance from another program, like they have a housing choice voucher, or two, their crisis pre-existed COVID. And that is a number that we are closely monitoring in Marion County because we have a significant eviction problem in Marion County during normal times that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. So there are some sources that exist in Marion County. The most public source is township assistance that can assist someone whose crisis predates the pandemic. And then we have several sort of philanthropic or faith-based sources that flow through our community center system, our community action program, Community Action of Greater Indianapolis, Urban League, as well as assistance that churches and their congregations may provide. And some churches in Marion County will provide that assistance whether you're a church member or not. So there is a list, and the Indiana 211 is a really good network to plug people into for our sort of quote unquote traditional rental assistance programs, and indyrent.org obviously is still compiling those who would like to be considered for our COVID related rental assistance.
The next question is probably for Brandon. It asks, it's from Michelle Robinson, who asked, are courts in session with COVID-19 or is court virtual?
That's a loaded question there. That's a very good question. And frankly, at this point, I will just say it's going to vary court by court, whether they're virtual or in person. That's again, one of the points I was trying to make as to why there's a need to maybe to extend the moratorium. I believe that as the courts have been operating, at least I can speak to where I live in Marion County, that they are offering virtual hearings. I believe they send out instructions for how that operates and how to log on. I'm very concerned, frankly, for low-income tenants and elderly tenants about access to courts. I'm a youngish person and I struggle getting on Zoom and GoToMeeting and all these things, so I don't know how that's going to be expected for low-income folks to do. So I would say that the best, if you aren't sure, just call your clerk's office. As far as I understand, throughout the state, they're all either working social distancing in person or at least have the mechanisms and to get a call back to you from at home. So it's really going to vary, frankly, court by court, which again, I think we would need a uniform system would be helpful, but that's really the best answer I can give you is just look and see what your local court's doing and maybe give them a call.
Yeah, Brandon, I've talked to several of our small claims judges here in Marion County, and it's a little bit of everything. And the one thing that may work in our favor to slow this this flow of potential filings is the fact that those that are meeting in person are social distancing, and so there's a maximum number of people that can be in the courtroom, and so that means a maximum number of cases that they can hear in a day, and it's much lower than it would be during non-pandemic times.
Sure, that's a great point. Thanks, Jeff.
The next question comes from Ihcda Hinshaw, who says, what should a tenant do if they can pay past due rent, but not the late fees associated with the past due rent? In other words, the landlord refuses to accept any amount because the payment is late.
That's a good question. I will say also, I did not cover this, but under the CARES Act, if it's one of the federally subsidized programs or the covered properties, which is the language of the CARES Act, those landlords and owners are prohibited, even if the lease says that they can, are prohibited from including extra charges based on rent. So late fees and things like that cannot be accrued if it's a CARES Act covered property. As for private leases, of course, there's the freedom to contract here in Indiana. I guess from an advocacy or my legal information suggestion would be if they can pay base rent, have them pay base rent. And again, based on the pandemic, it's going to vary court per court, or court by court, judge by judge. But I would try to pay the base rent and argue to a court if it really does go to, if the landlord is willing to take it for fees to an eviction hearing, and argue that it's not a material breach of the lease. They should be allowed to be on a repayment plan for those fees, and eviction should not be the result just because they couldn't pay the fees if they could cover base rent. That's my kind of broad general response to that.
Thanks, Brandon. The next question is probably going to be for both Jennifer and Jeff, and it asks, it's from Amy Patras, who says, does Indianapolis or other municipalities have any plan to increase shelter capacity in anticipation of the eviction tsunami? Does the city have a plan to, does the city or cities have a plan to respond to a likely spike in the number of residents experiencing homelessness?
Well, the short answer is yes, we're putting $10 million into rapid rehousing, using some separate sources that came to us via the CARES Act. You know, I think it was mentioned earlier that, you know, the number of people experiencing homelessness could certainly increase as a result of what could happen starting Monday, but it won't happen right away. And so, we have the ability to sort of, unfortunately, get out in front of what could be a homelessness increase that's precipitated by an increase in evictions. Some of that's rapid rehousing, and then some of that is adding safe non-congregate space, which we've done to some degree so far, but but stand ready to increase that capacity if we need to. Now, the best solution is to prevent somebody from being homeless to begin with, and so we're going to do that for as fast and as long as we can, while we try to fortify the safety net in those cases where a family does experience homelessness because of eviction.
Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer?
Yeah, I'd just like to touch on, because Jeff's right, we do foresee some additional rapid rehousing dollars, though for the balance of state of Indiana, no one has actually received any of them. So we're very concerned about what this could look like, because right now we don't have enough funding to help all of the people that are currently experiencing homelessness. So we can't build a bigger homeless system, especially right now in the middle of a pandemic. We've all had to really work on deconcentrating our congregate shelters to make sure that we are providing a safe place for people to be. So the focus these last few months have really been on kind of prioritizing those who are really at risk for COVID, and how do we get them out of here and expedite them, and by utilizing some financial resources for people that don't have continuous income. So we're very, very concerned about what that looks like. Now, we do have some partnerships with local hotels, so they can provide some of that as a Band-Aid while we're working on housing solutions, but they are not donating them. So that clearly takes some additional funding. So there are ideas and thoughts about what that could look like, but the financial resources must come along. So we're working on that.
Great, thank you both. This one from Robin Hilber. She asked, are there any programs available for those who seem to have a chronic problem of being delinquent on their rent?
I'm
Jeff,
not sure about this.
Yeah. Oh, I was just
saying,
I'm not aware that and this is Andrew, not aware of, there was not really a pre-existing statewide rental assistance program. I wonder if we would hear, township trustees, I think, have a lot of flexibility, but I don't know that there is any, I don't know if anyone would jump forward and say, like, those are often being used for chronically behind on rent.
Yeah, and I guess I would, putting on my former trustee hat, I would want to try to understand if it was chronic delinquency, like every month the rent came in on the 10th, and it was past due on the 5th. Like, is it a paycheck timing issue? Is it or is it just a simply it's a family that faces a really high rent burden, and they're paycheck to paycheck, and the numbers just don't add up. Understanding the circumstances and knowing that every family's situation is a little bit different would probably lead to some programs that exist where that family would fit in. I would just want to know a little bit more about that circumstance.
And I'll just add that part of the coordinated entry system is for Hoosiers that are, really having some kind of a housing instability challenge at the time. So part of that is a prevention piece. And so as we are doing those assessments on people that maybe they're at risk of becoming evicted, or they've received an eviction notice and that's been the overall theme, one of the things that we have done for mediation is to refer to a local program called Homestead CS, where they provide a tenant education piece. And so if we can kind of work that with the landlord, with the tenant, invite the tenant to attend this class, maybe work out a repayment agreement plan, maybe switch the dates on when things are due, that has helped before, but that's all that I know of.
Yeah, I mean, we have a really good program that many of our community centers partner in, and some of our community-based organizations that are not community centers, called the Center for Working Families, which does exactly what Jennifer just said. Sort of takes family by the hand and kind of looks top to bottom at everything that's going on in their lives. And if it's a situation where they just live in a place that is too expensive, then finding housing that's affordable when rent is due is one solution, but the other solutions are building the family's toolkit so that maybe they increase their earnings and an ability to pay and stay where they are.
A few more questions here. The next one is going to be for you, Jeff, and it's from Kelly Trimble, who asks, what is the status of the landlord registration program in Indianapolis?
Well, the status is that it is a city ordinance, and we did a mass mailing at the end of the year last year. We were able to use some data gathering tools that we put together to identify those who we thought, based on the data, were landlords who had not registered, and we had a pretty massive increase in registrations that came as a part of that first of its kind mailing that we've ever done. So I think we'll do that again. And then we will use the data that we gather from this rental assistance program to reach out to landlords that have participated, as well as landlords that have chosen not to participate, to send them a reminder that it's time to register for the landlord registry. And then on top of that, we have a tenant bill of rights, for lack of a better description, that took effect July 1st, that we are working with community partners and MIBOR and the Apartment Association to raise awareness of that program and get landlords to comply with it, which requires that for every new lease executed after July 1st, a landlord needs to furnish a list of the tenant's rights and responsibilities to that tenant at the time of signing. So we've got a couple of programs that we hope to grow to continue to sort of level the playing field on behalf of tenants in Marion County.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from Maggie Sparts. So there are resources and materials out there to help landlords. Can we get problem-solving courts to mediate versus follow the standard Indiana judicial procedures? Brandon, is that something you'd like to take?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. That's kind of teeing up to the program that will hopefully be launched here. So yeah, right now, again, the Landlord Tenant Task Force is working on this mediation program that's going to allow either landlords or tenants to opt into it. Again, I think tenants, if they'll be notified either if there's a court filing or if it's just a strict mediation. But frankly speaking, from a practical side of things, we always, with our tenant clients, certainly encourage informal negotiations, informal settlement or or working things out. Again, that's with the repayment plans. I will say again, I'd advise and suggest to look at the Indiana Supreme Court's website, and specifically the Landlord Tenant Task Force report. All of the appendices I should say, that came with the report. Some are certainly court specific, but a lot of them are meant for both landlords and tenants to use in order to try to reach these informal agreements. So the answer is sort of like, hopefully in the future there will be a mediation program, but right now that's it's not in existence. But again, it doesn't need to be a formal process to reach an agreement.
Thank you, Brandon. The next question comes from Florence May. She says she's a trustee in Vernon Township, located in Hancock County, and working as a provider for the rental assistance program. She says they've only received a handful of applications to process so far. Are there issues with getting the applications out to the townships, and how can township trustees help?
That sounds like it's a question related to the state's program and not Marion County's program. So I don't know that I can answer that specifically.
And this is Andrew. I'm jumping in to say, again, yeah, my question is this for township relief or is it for the state rental assistance program? And that to me points back to this question that we've had, at least from advocates, about, how connected are service providers and even the people processing these applications, where do those connections happen, and where does more proactive outreach need to be happening? That does make me a little concerned again that people aren't getting the information and applications aren't being processed in time. So more question for me than an answer.
Sure. A follow-up to a question that Amy Patras had asked earlier. For those experiencing homelessness before being eligible for rapid rehousing programs, will the eligibility requirements be adjusted for rapid rehousing programs? Is that something you could answer, Jennifer?
I can answer, and no, there are no changes to the eligibility requirements for rapid rehousing. So, and that's part of the disconnect for the rental assistance program through the state, is that there are two different pots of money, and one is the rental assistance fund, the RAF, and so that is much less paperwork and much less cumbersome for landlords and for tenants to qualify. But the emergency solutions grant funding is a federal source of funding that comes to us, which does come along with the literally a 20-page contract of paperwork for the tenant and the landlord, including lead-based paint information, inspections. Like, there's a lot more to it. So no, I have not seen where any of the eligibility criteria has been changed.
Great, thank you for that. That looks like all of the questions for now.
Carrie, I actually have one more question to pose, if you don't mind. And actually,
sure.
To Brandon, just as kind of a summary. So this has been discussed in a couple of ways, but just so people leave with this clear idea, what's the kind of timeline that a renter might face, starting Friday? Let's say that they have a landlord that, they're behind on rent. Maybe they've tried to reach out, but they haven't been able to establish a payment plan, and they haven't been granted a form of assistance. How many days could they expect until, they would be, served with an eviction notice, till they would have somebody coming to bring their stuff out on the street, et cetera?
This is a great question. And again, it's going to vary, and it may vary greatly between counties, and even frankly in Marion County between the township courts. So I can just, I guess, speak from my experience of normal times, pre-COVID times. Typically here in Marion County, once an eviction case was filed, it would typically be heard. I guess I'll just kind of say in the beginning of the year, they could be set within 2 weeks. Towards the end of the year, it'd usually be about a month out, based on the court's backlog. you know, in working with other judges, I know, like, for instance, Lake County, if anyone's in Lake County, they've already said that they wouldn't even set them for 30 days, set an eviction hearing for 30 days after it's been filed. So as terrible as it sounds, and I wish I had a better answer, it's really the court's discretion and based on what the court's, you know, load's going to be and how really inundated they are. I mean, to Jeff's point, if it's a tenant who can only do in person and it's going to be an in-person hearing, that may be set off, you know, even further down the line. And again, you're going to have to look to your local courts to see even how to request that. I know with these, you know, Zoom or WebEx or whatever other hearings or telephonic, I do want to also make that point is that the courts are trying to be very mindful that not everyone has technology and not everyone has it available. So telephone is one option, which again, I won't go on my tangent, but not everyone also has telephone or telephone minutes. But anyway, I digress. It's going to, again, county by county, I would say probably, if I'm going to guess here, you know, the average would probably be 30 days before the first hearing. But as I said, again, the task force recommendations were for that first hearing to be an information hearing and not to be a possession hearing. So you're going to have to see if your court's going to adopt and follow that policy or follow that recommendation, I should say, because that way it could be 30 days. You have an information hearing with the judge and your landlord. That forces you both to be, you know, virtually or technically, I guess, in the same room to potentially get to that agreement. So that would be my guess. And again, if courts are just slammed, it could be longer. And it's just gonna, like I said, this is an emerging issue and we're just gonna have to see what happens.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of Prosperity Indiana, we want to thank each of you for participating in today's webinar, Preparing Hoosiers for the End of Indiana's Eviction Moratorium. Please look for an email from me tomorrow morning inviting you to take a very brief survey, as well as a listing of the resources that were mentioned on today's webinar. Your feedback is important as we use this information to enhance the quality of our webinars and training. Also, please check out our website, prosperityindiana.org, to view upcoming events and training for the remainder of August. Next Monday, July 17th, we will host a webinar partnering with Community Development Corporations and Community Housing Development Organizations. The webinar begins at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and registration is open on our website. Finally, we extend our thanks to AARP Indiana for making today's webinar possible. And we also wish to thank our panelists, Jeff, Brandon, Jennifer, and Andrew, for sharing their insights. Again, we appreciate your participation. This now concludes our webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.